Medal of Honor recipient
I am
staff,
sorry, but
Sergeant
it's our
Daniel
policy.
Hayes, stood
We
at the
have to
hotel
charge
front
extra for
desk,
pets.
his service dog, Valor, sitting perfectly at attention beside him, when the night clerk added a $200
Sir,
pet
this
fee
is a
to his
standard
bill.
hotel policy.
What happened in the next 7 minutes didn't just shock the hotel staff. It shut down the entire corporate system and changed policy for
This is
847
my official
properties
ID
nationwide.
and my Medal of Honor.
If you believe
identification.
our heroes deserve better than this, hit that
This is
subscribe
a
button
trained
right
service
now
dog, and he
and
is
let us know in
authorized
the
to be-
comments what you would have done in Daniel's
cannot allow
situation.
this.
The Hampton Hills Hotel lobby at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday smelled like industrial carpet cleaner mixed with burnt coffee from the breakfast station that had been sitting there since 6 in the morning. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting that harsh white glow that makes everyone look tired and everything feel artificial. Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes stood at the front desk, his civilian clothes, dark jeans and a navy blue polo, deliberately chosen to blend in. At 34, he carried himself with the unconscious precision of someone who'd spent 12 years in the army. Though his tired eyes and the way he unconsciously scanned the lobby's exits suggested a man still fighting battles most people couldn't. C. Valor, his black Labrador retriever, sat perfectly positioned at Daniel's left side. The dog wore a professional service vest with patches that read, "Service Dog, Do Not Pet," and PTSD support. But it wasn't the vest that marked Valor as special. It was the way he constantly monitored Daniel, reading body language and stress signals that most people would never notice. Daniel had driven 14 hours straight from Fort Liberty North Carolina to Denver, Colorado. Tomorrow, he was supposed to speak at a Veterans Memorial dedication, sharing his story so people would remember the price paid by soldiers who came home different than they left. The drive had been hell, every sudden brake light triggering memories of convoy attacks, every overpass reminding him of sniper positions he'd cleared in Fallujah. Valor had been his anchor through all of it, trained to detect the shallow breathing that preceded panic attacks, the muscle tension that meant Daniel was slipping back into combat mode, the 1,000-yard stare that meant he was somewhere else entirely. When the flashbacks got bad on I-70 near Junction, Valor had pressed his paw against Daniel's leg, bringing him back to the present moment. The night clerk looked young, maybe 22, about the same age Daniel had been when he first deployed to Iraq. Ashley, according to her name tag, processed his reservation with the mechanical efficiency of someone working the graveyard shift at a chain hotel. Everything seemed routine until she noticed Valor. Her fingers stopped moving across the keyboard. She looked at the dog, then at Daniel, then back at her computer screen. "I need to add a pet fee," she said, her voice carrying that flat tone people use when they're about to deliver bad news. Daniel felt his chest tighten slightly. He'd done this dance at probably 50 hotels over the past 3 years since Valor joined him. Usually it was a quick conversation, show the documentation, explain federal law, move on, but something in Ashley's tone suggested this wasn't going to be one of those times. "That's a service dog," Daniel said, keeping his voice level. "Service. Animals aren't subject to pet fees under the ADA. Ashley didn't even look up from her screen. "We have a strict policy about animals, sir. $200 cleaning fee plus $50 per night. Corporate has been cracking down on people claiming their pets are service animals." Daniel pulled out his documentation folder, the same worn manila folder he'd carried since Valor first came into his life. 18 months ago, VA medical documentation, service dog certification from Canine Companions for Independence, a letter from his psychiatrist at the VA explaining Valor's role in managing his PTSD. He'd shown these papers so many times the edges were soft from handling. Ashley glanced at the folder for maybe 3 seconds before shaking her head. "Sir, I've seen all kinds of fake documentation. People print this stuff off the internet just to avoid paying fees. Hotel policy is hotel policy." Daniel's pulse ticked faster. Valor sensed the change immediately, shifting position to press closer. against Daniel's leg. The dog had been trained to recognize the early warning signs, the slight change in breathing, the way Daniel's shoulders tensed, the unconscious way he started scanning for exits. "This isn't fake," Daniel said, his voice still controlled but with an edge creeping in. "This is official VA documentation. Federal law prohibits charging fees for legitimate service animals." Ashley's eyes narrowed. "Look, you seem like a nice guy, but you look young and healthy. Real service dogs are for blind people or people in wheelchairs. PTSD isn't the same thing as being actually disabled." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. For a split second, his mind flashed to a dusty street in Ramadi, the moment an IED had torn through his Humvee, killing his gunner and leaving Daniel with injuries that couldn't be seen but never stopped hurting. Valor's steady pressure against his leg brought him back to the Hampton Hills lobby, but the familiar tightness in his chest was building. "Ma'am," Daniel said, each word carefully measured, "I'm a Medal of Honor recipient. I fought for this country for 12 years. Valor isn't a pet, he's medical equipment. He's trained to detect panic attacks and pull me back from flashbacks." Ashley's expression didn't change. "Medals don't excuse policy, sir. I'm not trying to be difficult, but rules are rules. If you want to keep the dog in the room, you need to pay the fee." Her tone carried the dismissive efficiency of someone who'd never held a dying teammate, never felt the weight of survivor's guilt, never woken up in a cold sweat, wondering why they made it home when better men didn't. The businessman by the elevator had stopped pretending to check his phone and was openly watching now. An elderly couple near the vending machines had paused, their quiet conversation, their eyes wide with something between confusion and outrage. A woman with 2 young children was hurrying them toward the stairwell, clearly uncomfortable with the tension in the lobby. Daniel's hands were starting to shake slightly, not from fear, but from the familiar surge of adrenaline that his body couldn't quite distinguish from combat stress. Valor immediately moved closer, providing the deep pressure therapy he'd been trained to deliver. The dog's calm presence was the only thing keeping Daniel's breathing steady. "You're asking me to pay $200 because I have PTSD from serving my country," Daniel said, pulling out his phone. "I'm going to document this conversation." Ashley's demeanor shifted immediately. "Sir, you don't have permission to record on private property. I'll call security if you don't put that away." "This is a public accommodation," Daniel replied, his thumb steady despite the tremor in his chest. "I have every right to document a potential civil rights violation." The businessman approached, his expression serious. "Excuse me," he said quietly to Daniel. "I'm an attorney. If you need a witness, I'm happy to help." Ashley's face flushed. "Look, I don't make the rules, okay? I'm just trying to do my job. You can talk to the manager in the morning if you want, to file a complaint." Daniel felt the old combat calm settling over him, the same focus that had kept him alive during firefights, the same determination that had carried him through the worst moments of his military career. "This isn't about money," he said, his voice dropping to a tone that had once carried orders across battlefields. "It's about respect. It's about the promise I made to my brothers who didn't make it home that I'd keep fighting for them here." The lobby had gone completely quiet. Even the vending machines seemed to hum more softly. Other guests had stopped what they were doing, some pulling out their own phones to record, others just watching with expressions of disbelief. Ashley doubled down. "Sir, I've been working here for 2 years. I know what real service dogs look like. That dog looks too healthy, too well-groomed. Most of the fake service dogs I see are exactly like that. Expensive breeds with vests people bought online." Valor remained perfectly still throughout the verbal assault, his training overriding any natural instinct to react to the hostile tone. His dark eyes stayed fixed on Daniel, monitoring for signs that his handler might need intervention. Daniel's chest was getting tighter, the familiar sensation of walls closing in that Valor was trained to detect and interrupt. But before the dog could react, the phone at the front desk rang. The sound cut through the tension like a knife. Ashley answered with her standard greeting, but her expression changed almost immediately as she listened to the voice on the other end. The color drained from her face and her free hand started trembling. "Yes, sir," she stammered into the phone. I understand. "No, sir, I'll handle it right now." She hung up and looked at Daniel with confusion, then alarm, then something that might have been panic. "Sir," she said, her voice suddenly small, "you need to pack your bags right now." Daniel's brow furrowed. After everything that had just happened, now they were kicking him out? "Why?" he asked. Ashley swallowed hard, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Because that was corporate compliance. They're shutting down our system for emergency maintenance. The general manager is on his way. I think I made a mistake." What Ashley didn't know was that the businessman who'd offered to witness had used those few minutes to make some calls of his own. His law firm had represented hospitality companies in ADA compliance cases before, and he knew exactly who to contact when he witnessed what was essentially a textbook civil rights violation happening in real time. Within minutes, his call had reached someone who had direct access to Hampton Hills legal department. Corporate counsel was pulled out of bed to review a potential federal lawsuit, and when they heard the details, Medal of Honor recipient, service dog, clear ADA violation, multiple witnesses recording, every alarm bell in the building started ringing. The legal team immediately contacted the hotel with emergency instructions. "Fix this situation now before it becomes a public relations disaster and a federal case." Daniel felt valor shift closer, the dog sensing that something significant was happening. The lobby around them seemed to hold its breath as Ashley's hands shook over the keyboard. "Sir," she tried again, but her voice cracked. "I was just following hotel policy. I didn't know—" "Policy doesn't override federal law," Daniel said quietly. The words carrying the weight of every uniform he'd ever worn, every medal he'd earned in places most people couldn't pronounce. "Valor isn't a pet. He's trained to keep me alive." The businessman stepped closer. "Daniel, may I call you Daniel?" "What just happened here was illegal. Charging service dog fees violates the Americans with Disabilities Act. That phone call probably came from corporate lawyers trying to contain the damage." Before Ashley could respond, the front desk phone rang again. She picked it up with hands that were now visibly shaking. "Hampton Hills Hotel, this is—" "Yes, sir. Yes, he's right here, I understand." She hung up and looked at Daniel with something approaching terror. "The general manager is here," she whispered. "He wants to see you immediately." A man in his 50s appeared from the back office, still buttoning a hastily thrown-on dress shirt. His face carried the drawn exhaustion of someone who'd been pulled from bed for an emergency, but his eyes held the sharp focus of a professional trying to contain a crisis. "Staff Sergeant Hayes," he said, his voice respectful but urgent. "I'm Michael Rodriguez, the general manager. First, let me sincerely apologize for what just happened. This should never have occurred." Daniel studied the man's face, seeing genuine concern rather than the corporate damage control he'd expected. "Thank you," he said simply. Rodriguez turned to Ashley, his expression hardening. "Ashley, you're being placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation and mandatory retraining. What happened here tonight was a violation of federal law and company policy." Ashley's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought I was protecting the hotel from fraud." Daniel felt Valor's steady presence at his side and made a decision that surprised even himself. "She didn't know," he said to Rodriguez. "But that's the problem. Too many people don't understand what service dogs do or what disabilities look like." Rodriguez nodded gravely. "You're absolutely right, Staff Sergeant, and we're going to fix that." He turned back to Daniel. I've already reversed all charges related to Valor. There will be no pet fees now or ever, but I'd like to do more than that. He gestured toward the elevator. We'd like to upgrade you to our presidential suite, complimentary breakfast, and anything else you might need. But more importantly, I'm implementing immediate changes. Every employee at every Hampton Hills property will undergo mandatory ADA compliance training. No exceptions. Daniel felt something shift in his chest. Not the tight anxiety that had been building, but something like relief. It's not about the upgrade, he said. It's about making sure the next veteran with a service dog doesn't have to fight this fight. Consider it done, Rodriguez said firmly. Corporate is already drafting new training protocols. This will never happen again. The businessman who'd witnessed everything stepped forward. If I may, he said, what happened here tonight was more than just a policy failure. It was educational. Sometimes people need to see the reality of what our veterans face. Daniel looked around the lobby, at Ashley, whose tears had finally started falling, at the businessman who'd stood up when it mattered, at the other guests who'd witnessed something they probably hadn't expected when they checked into a hotel for the night. Everyone makes mistakes, Daniel said, his voice carrying across the quiet lobby. The question is what we do after we make them. Do we learn, or do we keep making the same mistakes? Ashley wiped her eyes. I want to learn, she said quietly. I didn't understand, but I want to. Rodriguez nodded. Ashley will be part of our new training program. In fact, I think her experience tonight might make her one of our best advocates for proper service dog accommodation. As they walked toward the elevator, Valor trotting calmly beside them, Daniel reflected on what had just happened. 7 minutes ago, he'd been facing discrimination and disrespect. Now, an entire hotel chain was changing its policies because one veteran had refused to back down. The presidential suite was on the 15th floor, spacious and quiet, with a view of the Denver skyline. Rodriguez personally carried Daniel's worn duffel bag, treating it like something precious. Staff Sergeant, Rodriguez said as they reached the door, I served in the Gulf War. Marines. I should have known better than to let this happen in my hotel. Daniel paused, studying the man's face. When did you get out? 1993, before everything got really bad over there. Rodriguez's expression grew somber. I've heard about what you guys went through. Multiple deployments, IEDs watching. Friends, he trailed off, then straightened. What I'm trying to say is thank you for your service and for standing up tonight. You made us better. Inside the suite, Valor immediately began his security sweep, a routine he performed in every new environment. He checked corners, sniffed around doorways, then returned to Daniel's, sighed with a soft wag that meant all clear. Daniel sank into a chair by the window, finally allowing himself to relax. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the familiar exhaustion that came after any kind of confrontation. But this time, it felt different. This time, he'd won something bigger than just a free hotel room. His phone buzzed with an email from Hampton Hills Corporate. The subject line read, Immediate action taken. Thank you. The message was from the CEO himself, apologizing for the incident and outlining the company-wide changes being implemented. Every property would receive new training materials about service animals. Every employee would undergo mandatory education about invisible disabilities. The reservation system was being updated to flag legitimate service dog documentation automatically. But the part that hit Daniel hardest was the personal note at the end. Staff Sergeant Hayes, your Medal of Honor represents the highest ideals of service and sacrifice. We are honored that you chose to stay with us tonight, and we pledge that no other veteran will face the ignorance you encountered. Thank you for your patience, your service, and for helping us be better. Daniel felt his eyes sting, but he blinked the tears away. He thought about the young soldiers he'd led on patrol in Iraq and Afghanistan, about the ones who hadn't made it home, about the promises he'd made to carry their memory forward. Valor nudged his knee and looked up with those calm brown eyes that had seen Daniel through the worst moments of his transition back to civilian life. "We did good tonight, buddy," Daniel whispered. "Not just for us, but for everyone who comes after." A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Rodriguez stood there holding a small box wrapped in simple brown paper. "Staff Sergeant," he said. "This is from the entire night staff." They took up a collection, not for the fees, but as a gesture of respect. Daniel opened the box to find a polished nameplate that read, "Valor Service Dog. Welcome anywhere, anytime." "Thank you," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't try to hide. Rodriguez nodded, his own eyes damp. "We owe you more than a nameplate," he said, "but it's a start." After Rodriguez left, Daniel set the nameplate on the bedside table where Valor could see it. The dog's tail gave a single, satisfied thump against the carpet. Daniel pulled out his laptop and began typing, not a complaint or a demand for further action, but a letter to the VA's service dog program. He wanted them to know what had happened tonight, how one incident had led to system-wide changes that would benefit thousands of veterans. As he typed, he thought about the larger battle that veterans like him fought every day. Not against foreign enemies, but against ignorance, against assumptions about what disability looks like, against a civilian world that sometimes forgot the price paid for their freedom, but tonight had proven something important. When you stand up for what's right, when you refuse to accept less than the dignity you've earned, things can change. One conversation, one hotel clerk learning something new, one corporate policy updated. It all mattered. Valor settled beside the bed, his warm presence a reminder that Daniel wasn't fighting these battles alone. Tomorrow he would speak at the memorial dedication, sharing his story with people who needed to understand what service meant, what sacrifice looked like, what coming home really involved. But tonight, in this quiet hotel suite overlooking a sleeping city, Daniel Hayes, Medal of Honor recipient, combat veteran and proud partner to a service dog named Valor, felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, the satisfaction of a mission accomplished. 3 months later, Daniel received a handwritten letter from Ashley. She'd completed Hampton Hill's new comprehensive disability awareness training and had been promoted to assistant manager. Her letter included photos from the graduation ceremony where she'd been recognized as the employee who'd suggested the most improvements to the company's accessibility policies. "I wanted to thank you," she wrote, "for teaching me something I should have known all along. Heroes don't always look the way we expect them to, and the strongest people are often fighting battles we can't see. I hope, when other veterans come to our hotels, they'll find the respect and understanding you helped us learn to give. The real victory wasn't the upgraded room or the corporate apologies, it was knowing that other veterans with service dogs wouldn't face the same ignorant ET, assumptions and illegal charges." Daniel's willingness to document the incident and stand his ground had created changes that rippled far beyond his own experience. Valor continued to be his anchor in civilian life, detecting anxiety attacks before they started and providing the steady presence that made normal activities possible. The dog didn't care about corporate policies or federal laws. He just knew his job was to keep Daniel safe and functional. But sometimes, as they walked through hotel lobbies or airports or restaurants, Daniel noticed something different. Staff members were more respectful, more knowledgeable about service dog laws. Training programs had improved. Awareness had spread. And in those moments, Daniel remembered that the mission never really ends. It just changes forms. The fight for respect, for understanding, for the dignity that every veteran has earned, continues one conversation at a time, one stand at a time, one story at a time. Because sometimes the most important battle isn't the one you fight with weapons. It's the one you fight with patience, persistence, and the quiet dignity of knowing your worth and demanding that others recognize it too. Every hero deserves dignity, and every service dog deserves to stand beside their partner without question. Tonight, Daniel Hayes proved that one veteran's courage to stand up can change an entire system and remind us all what honor really looks like. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes that respect should never be negotiable. Drop a comment below telling us about a time you witnessed someone stand up for what's right. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that honor those who served and show us that sometimes the strongest fight is the one we fight for each other.